Welcome to another in the weekly series of development updates for Wolfgang. This one, as you can see, is mostly visual changes. The ambient occlusion that used to be on everything has now been replaced with a nice outline shader. I think this is a good change because the outline shader, I think, kind of complements the style of the game a little bit better. It's consistent with some of the UI elements already had an outline on them. I don't know, it's just a style I really like. It's my preference. The ambient occlusion was honestly only sort of added to give a sense of depth to the items because the textures and the environments are unlit. Especially when you'd have something like a group of trees bunched up like this, you would lose any sense of depth. So I just added ambient occlusion as a post effect to sort of address that. It was a band-aid solution. I don't think it looked very good. It was kind of muddy. It was inconsistent. Didn't really work for objects that are moving, like the grass or the water. And I think overall that this is just a more pleasant thing to look at. Other changes include mouse controls for the level select. So if you just click in a direction, it will map to the direction in the same way that you would for WASD if you were controlling with the keyboard. So it kind of keeps the input schemes consistent. And then as you can see, when I just tap on the keyboard, it automatically switches to keyboard input. When I click with the mouse, it automatically switches to mouse controls. And the behavior will be the same for switching to touch controls if you're on a touch tablet, or if you've got a gamepad plugged in. If you press any input on the gamepad, in the final version, it'll automatically switch it to gamepad. As of yet, I haven't added gamepad controls because what I want to do is replace the default Unity input controllers so that controls can be mapped within the game for the best accessibility that is possible. People can map the controls to whatever they want. So you might remember from last time, a lot of optimization was done for the grass, and the way that worked is it would populate the grass blades individually from prefab, and then it would combine the meshes together afterwards. Well, I've achieved a similar thing with the maps. As you can see from the scene view here, the maps are actually made up of individual tiles, and if you drop down into the map object here, you can actually see that the tiles are all individually different objects. But the mesh renderers are actually disabled because now it's actually combining the meshes together so that it can all be drawn at once. So you can see that as I enable and disable the mesh render object on the parent map object. And it still works with the occlusion. As you can see in the scene view here, as I move the camera around, it's hiding the tiles. So the reason I've done this is because Unity's default dynamic batching was kind of inconsistent. It might render like some foreground tiles as one draw call, and then some background tiles as one draw call, and then it looked like, based on what I was seeing in the frame debugger and in the profiler, it looked like it wasn't even happening at all on Android. So I've just decided to roll my own mesh combiner to handle that. So that's a nice little performance increase, gives some of the GPU labor to the CPU, so that'll help the game run on older laptops or laptops with integrated graphics processors. Given that the other change was the outline share, I want to talk a little bit about how that actually works because I'm actually kind of proud of it. It's the first time I've really had an outline shader that I'm happy with. So what it is it's actually a 3-pass shader. Not ideal, but it's not too expensive for how little is actually going on graphically in this game. So what it does is on the first pass, it actually uses the normalized normal values to get the outline with edges. So that'll give also the outlines that are in front of the character. So things like on Lucas here, things like his mouth and the I'll make this bigger so you can actually see what I'm talking about. His mouth and the corners of his hair spikes and such. If you turn them off, if you turn the normalized pass or the normal pass off, you actually lose those, so you just get the outline. So go ahead and turn that back on. And then the second pass is, as you saw, just the outline. And then finally the last pass is the base. So if we disable this pass, you can see that you just get the outline here. So what makes this a little bit different is I find that a lot of basic outline shaders tend to be pretty inconsistent because they handle different models in different ways. Let me just open up the disable maximize on play. Let me open up the material for Lucas here, and as you can see, as I increase the outline width value, it just sort of expands. And it does so kind of like in a more uniform way, like it's almost spherical. And I think that helps with consistency. You can actually get away with some relatively thick lines before things sort of get lost. Like I still keep it pretty low just for style purposes, but you can actually get away with a whole lot thicker, which is unusual for just the basic outline shaders. And the reason that is because the normal values and the vertex values for each of the passes are actually normalized. So the difference here is this is without it being normalized, and as you can see, it kind of like it sort of presents it as is, but depending on the camera position, that's not really ideal. It would work great if it was just dead on, but even then it's sort of depending on the shape of the model doesn't really work great. So the normalized value makes a huge difference. For other game devs or people who are just curious, I might write a more detailed tutorial later on how the outline shader works, and also things like the grass and stuff like that. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. A lot of time was spent this week refactoring code to make the input schemes consistent across touch, mouse, and keyboard controls. The reason I decided to do that is because the next feature that I want to add, which is the towns, it has a similar enough control scheme to the level maps, but slight differences, like you only control one character and there is no limit on your movement range. And to be able to avoid having to rewrite things for situational use, I decided it was smarter to refactor the input controls in general, just so it was consistent. There'd be less likely for me to run into problems where through some oversight I've forgotten to change something for a certain area. But yeah, going forward it'll be a lot better. So the next little thing that I'm going to be working on is the town areas where you'll be able to meet other characters, shop for items in the shop, and things like that. Alright, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.